Welcome to Sewing Anastasia, and today I'm going to show you how to create a rib knit binding for any pattern that you have. It could be the cuff, it could be the neck, it could be the hem. I'm going to show you how to measure your pattern and make sure that rib knit fits. This video was inspired by my sewing club's pattern of the month. This month we're making this cowl neck dress with these cuffs and a gorgeous hem. In the sewing club, I always have a few pattern hacks for every pattern that comes out, and I thought this would make a great additional pattern hack to the cowl dress. So here I am to share it with you today. If you'd like to check out my sewing club, make sure you check out the link down below in the description. It's a whole lot of fun, and there's also a Discord where you can join in and share the sewing fun with everybody. Share your projects, ask questions, all the good stuff. It's a whole sewing community. And if you want to make this dress, make sure you head over to the sewing club. You can download the pattern right now and sew along and make this dress. And just real quick, if you're enjoying Sewing Anastasia, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. Okay, so let's get into some rib knit bindings. In this demo, I'm going to be showing you how to make the rib knit fit perfectly for the cuff and sew it up. But I'm also going to talk about any other opening you might have on a garment, how to measure it, and how to make a pattern for that rib knit binding. In this pattern hack, I'm going to show you how to add a rib knit to all the hems. Maybe you want some rib knit cuffs and you don't want the button-up cuff, or maybe you want a rib knit neck, think of like a crew neck t-shirt, and you don't want the giant cowl. Or maybe you want to add a fun rib knit to the hem, which makes it like a bubble underneath. Really cool. Or you could wear it long and you can see it gathers up the bottom of it into the rib knit when you wear it. I'm going to be demoing how to sew it in for the cuff, but you're going to use the same sewing techniques for the neck and the hem of the dress. But making the rib knit fit correctly for each one is going to be a little bit different. So let's start on the cuff, and I'm going to show you how to sew it in and fit it in there, and then we'll talk about the neck and the hem. The first thing we need to do to make a rib knit cuff for this dress is grab your sleeve pattern, and we are going to measure the bottom opening of the sleeve. So we're measuring the bottom opening here, and it looks like I have 13 3/4. Now, this includes the seam allowance, so always double check the seam allowance on your pattern. This pattern has a 1/2 inch. So when I take the seam allowance away, I've got 12 3/4 here for the opening of my sleeve. So that's an important number, so we want to write that one down. And I also want to mention, if you've got a slit in your pattern or any other kind of details that were for the bottom opening and you want to add rib knit, just ignore all of those details there. So right now we're going to ignore that we have a slit here. Now that I have my number, I can figure out how much rib knit I need. Now there's two different ways we can go about this for the cuff. You can measure your wrist and see how tight you want your rib knit, or what you can do is take that measurement you got at the bottom of your sleeve and minus 2 to 3 inches, and that's going to give it enough stretch to be able to take your cuff and pull it back in. And when you're doing this, you want to test out your rib knit. Some of it stretches way more than other ones. I've definitely cut some pieces before and tried sewing them in, and I just end up with a ton of extra rib knit because it is so stretchy. Or quite the opposite, I've cut something and it's not stretching enough because it is not stretchy enough. Not all rib knits are made the same. Two things you can do to make sure that this turns out great for you is go ahead and take your fabric and wrap it around your wrist right now and see how it feels. Is it really stretching out or is it really sturdy? That's going to give you the indication of if you need a bigger rectangle or a smaller rectangle for this cuff here. To simplify the process of dealing with the amount of stretch in your rib knit with your pattern opening, here's what we're going to do. So my finished measurement here was 12 3/4. And if I minus 2 inches, I'm gonna get 10 3/4. And I'm gonna mark this on this piece of rib knit that I have. And now what I'm going to do is take this rib knit and I'm going to stretch it from end to end. And I'm gonna see how that feels. Is it stretching enough? Is it making it? Is it not making it? If my rib knit wasn't making it to the edge of my pattern, that means that my number needs to be bigger. And if I am stretching this way out over here, that means that my number needs to be smaller. And then you can stretch that and calculate that. Okay, I've got an extra inch over here on the side of the pattern. So that means I probably want to come in 1 more inch. And you know what? For this pattern, I think I'm going to. So I'm going to make it 9 3/4. So now I know that 9 3/4 is going to stretch real nice across the bottom opening of my sleeve with the rib knit that I chose. For the cuff, a lot of this is by feel. So if you feel like you are stretching it so much that the fabric's starting to fall apart and it is hard to stretch, you're stretching it too much. And if you feel like your fabric is getting to the end of the pattern piece too easy, then it's probably way too long. So this is a way that you can test the rib knit for a cuff on a project. So now I know the length of my rectangle needs to be 9 3/4 plus seam allowance. So choose your seam allowance. I'm going to be using 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to be adding 3/8 of an inch to each end of my rectangle. And then the other thing you need to figure out is how wide do you want that cuff? And then make sure you times that measurement times 2 because we're going to fold it in half when we sew it. And also don't forget your seam allowance on those ends. So come on, let's pattern draft that cuff. Now, if you're just doing this once, you don't have to make a pattern piece. You can just cut the rectangle out of your fabric. Just make sure you add that seam allowance. But if you're going to be doing it multiple times, you're going to want to create a pattern piece. So I'm going to be making my cuff 9 3/4. Plus, we need to add our seam allowance. So I'm going to go ahead and add another 3/4 of an inch here. And now I'm going to make my cuff 4 inches wide. So I'm going to go ahead and measure 4 inches out here on my quilting ruler. I'm going to draw a line across the top. Okay, and now if I want it 4 inches wide, so 2 inches folded in half, I need to add an additional 3/4 to this side because I need seam allowance on both ends here. Now I'm using the edge of my paper as one side, and I need to come up over here on the other side. So now this here is the length of our cuff, and this here is the width of our cuff. So now we have a pattern piece for our cuff. Now I'm going to cut it out, and then we can cut it out of fabric. So I've cut out my rib knit right here. You can see it's the same size as my pattern piece. And for demo, I've cut out a piece of fabric that is the same length as the bottom opening of the sleeve. Now it's time to sew it all together. The first step is sewing these pieces together individually. So the sleeve, you would sew it together, right sides together, sew up your underarm seam. The rib knit, fold it, right sides together, and sew up your rib knit seam. So my seam allowance on my shirt was a 1/2 inch. So I'm gonna follow a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the underseam of this shirt. My rib knit piece had a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch. Now you can use a straight stitch for this, or you can use your serger. And you can see when you use the straight stitch, it doesn't pop because the knit is going the opposite way and stretch. Now that these are sewn up, we're going to take the rib knit one, and we're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together. So when we fold this in half, you should have a nice clean edge on the outside and on the inside. And we want to get these 2 layers here to line up nice. There we go, just like that. And then this one, we're going to take it and flip it right side out. And now what we're going to do is sew these 2 together. And you can see that this one is smaller than the sleeve, which is what we want. Now we're going to flip this one down on top of it, lining up the raw edges. So I'm going to flip it like this, and we're going to put this one inside. And so now what we need to do is line up the seams. So we want to line up all the seams. You got 2 rib knit seams, and then you have 1 sleeve seam. I'm going to open up my sleeve seam too. So we're going to start by pinning these seams together so that way it ends up really nice looking. And then what you need to do is take it and you're going to stretch it. So I always like to stretch it in half, and then I'm going to hold it here, and then I'm going to pin right here. We're essentially quartering it. I have a really great video on quartering too if you need some help with that. And now what I'm going to do is stretch in between those 2 pins, lining up everything. Grab it in the middle, and then I'm going to pin that right there. I'm going to flip it over to the other side, and now I'm going to stretch in between those 2 pins, grab it in the middle, and pin it together. So now I have this rib knit stretched and pinned out evenly. Now I'm going to go and sew all the way around the bottom. You're just going to use the seam allowance that you left on your pattern or that your pattern has. So you need to make sure when you're sewing this that you're stretching and sewing, and you can use a straight stitch for this because we have a woven fabric on the bottom. Now if you had a knit dress, I would definitely use the serger or use your knit stitch. But because we have a woven involved, we don't have to worry about that. Make sure you're back stitching and take out your project. So we finished sewing up the cuff. Let's take a look at it and compare it to that pattern. So you can see here, the rib knit fits really nice into the cuff. We've got that seam nice and lined up. But if we take a look at the pattern, I want you to see that that rib knit pattern is smaller than the opening of the sleeve, and it fits in here really nice. So we need that rib knit pattern smaller than the opening of the sleeve. That's really important. And if you wanted this to be even tighter, remember, all you need to do is make your rib knit pattern smaller. This technique can be applied anywhere on a pattern. Maybe you've got a cutout, maybe you've got the top of a pocket, a sleeve, a neck, a hem, anywhere you can think of that you want to add rib knit for finishing that edge. This is the process that you can apply to it. So this is a universal technique, but sometimes you're going to want it a specific tightness somewhere on the body. And let me show you how you can work around that. So I love the rib knit on the bottom of this dress, and you can see it's holding the dress up because it is tight and fitted on the thighs. So if I pull this dress up here, it's also giving it like a little bubble effect. This fabric looks gathered, but it is not actually gathered. It is just stretched and sewn into the rib knit here. And so we want it tight on the thighs. So that is the measurement we want to go with. So if you want something tight on your thighs, I want you to measure your thighs for the measurement that you're going to be working with. So if this one says it is 17 1/4 going around the thighs here. And if you want it tight on your thighs, you need to make sure you take off a few inches of that. And then you can sew it into the hem of a dress, let's say. So the same technique for anywhere that you want the rib knit tight on your body. Measure your body, not the pattern. And make sure you're stretching out the rib knit to fit the pattern. So if you're doing this technique, you want to make sure you have a rib knit that is really stretchy, probably about 50% stretch. Now let's talk about a problem that happens around the neck when you try adding rib knit. So if we take a look at the neck here on this one, it looks fine, it pops out, it's almost got like a little mini cowl action happening. But if you want the rib knit at the neck to actually lay flat to the body, you need to make this neck pattern smaller. So if you are getting this popping out, that means your pattern piece needs to be smaller, and you need to stretch it more when you sew it onto the neck so that this stretched out piece is actually up here as well. So this one right here probably has another good 2 inches that can come out of the pattern if we want it to lay flat to the neck. Now maybe you don't, maybe this is the look you want, that's totally fine. But that is one way that you can deal with fixing that problem if you want a tight crew neck style. Today we learned how to create rib knit for an existing pattern. You learned how to size the rib knit to your body and make your pattern fit the rib knit. And we learned how to deal with the problem if it's happening in your rib knit. So now you should be able to add rib knit to all of the openings of your garments. Plus, you learned how to sew the rib knit on as well. So now you should be able to add rib knit to everything. So exciting. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Sewing Anastasia. It really helps out the channel a lot. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And if you're in Chicago, come on into my design studio and take some sewing and design classes with me. And if you're not, well, that's okay. Make sure you check out the Online Sewing Academy. There's links down below for everything. And don't forget about the Sewing Club because you get a cool new sewing pattern every month with tons of tutorials and hacks and access to the Discord, which is a really great sewing community. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.